I remember the moment I discovered my wife's betrayal as if it were etched into my mind, a permanent scar that would never fully heal. It was a Wednesday evening, a day that had started off like any other. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden hue over our living room. I had just come home from work, the scent of my favorite coffee lingering in the air, and I was looking forward to an evening spent with the woman I loved. Little did I know that my world was about to shatter. I walked through the door, greeted by the familiar sounds of our home, the soft hum of the television, the aroma of something simmering on the stove. But as I moved further inside, I noticed something was off. The atmosphere felt charged, heavy with unspoken words. My wife, Sarah, was sitting on the couch, her eyes glued to her phone, a nervous energy radiating from her. "Hey, babe," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "What's for dinner?" She looked up, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just some pasta. How was work?" "Same as always, just the usual grind, but I'm glad to be home now." I dropped my bag and headed toward the kitchen, but Sarah's phone buzzed again and she flinched. That flinch, something about it sent a shiver down my spine. I brushed it off, convincing myself that I was just being paranoid. But as the evening wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I tried to engage her in conversation, but she was distant, her mind clearly elsewhere. It was infuriating. Finally, I decided to retreat into my study, hopping to clear my head. As I sat at my desk, staring blankly at the screen, I felt the urge to check her phone. I knew it was wrong, but the nagging suspicion in my chest urged me on. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the guilt. When I picked it up, my heart raced. I scrolled through her messages, each one pulling me deeper into a pit of despair. Then I found it, a thread of conversations with a name that made my blood run cold: Professor Daniel Hargrove. He was a respected figure in the academic world, known for his work in ethics, a man who preached principles of morality while clearly disregarding them in his personal life. I read their exchanges, each message a dagger to my heart. The way she spoke to him, the intimacy of their words. It was as if I was reading a love letter, not a conversation between a wife and her husband's colleague. I felt my breath hitch in my throat, the room closing in around me. How could she do this? How could she betray everything we had built together? The weight of disbelief crashed over me, and I staggered back from the desk, my mind racing. I felt sick, a mix of anger and confusion spiraling within me. I stumbled back into the living room where Sarah was still perched on the couch. She looked up, her expression shifting from surprise to fear as she saw my face. "What's wrong? Who is Daniel Hargrove?" I demanded, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. Her face paled, eyes widening in realization. I can explain." "Explain? How do you explain this?" I held out the phone, the damning messages displayed for her to see. "You're sleeping with him, the professor who teaches ethics. How ironic is that?" The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the gears turning in her mind, but I didn't want to hear any excuses. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I was filled with an overwhelming sense of betrayal. In that moment, everything I thought I knew about love and trust crumbled before me. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of anguish, the waves crashing over me, pulling me under. How could the woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, be capable of such deceit? It was the beginning of a long and painful journey, one that would force me to confront not only her betrayal, but also the very nature of morality, ethics, and the choices we make. Was I ready for what lay ahead? Before the storm of betrayal swept through my life, Sarah and I had a relationship that many would envy. We met in college, both fresh-faced and eager to take on the world. I remember the first time I saw her in that crowded lecture hall, her laughter ringing like music, the way her eyes sparkled with mischief. We bonded over late-night study sessions, shared dreams and aspirations, and a mutual love for adventure. Our relationship blossomed into a deep friendship which eventually morphed into something more, something beautiful. We often spoke of our future together, painting vivid pictures of the life we wanted to build. Sarah wanted to pursue a career in social work, driven by her passion for helping others. I was focused on my writing, dreaming of becoming a crime novelist. We shared values, ambitions, and a commitment to each other that felt unbreakable. We married after graduation, convinced that we could weather any storm together. But as the years went by, life had a way of complicating things. The pressures of work, the mundane routine of daily life, and the responsibilities of adulthood began to seep into our relationship, creating cracks in the foundation we had built. I was often consumed by my writing, spending long hours at my desk, lost in fictional worlds. Sarah, too, was busy with her job, pouring herself into her work, often coming home exhausted and irritable. We began to drift, our once vibrant conversations replaced by surface-level exchanges. I noticed the change but didn't know how to address it. It was as if we were living parallel lives, sharing a home but not truly connecting. I thought it was just a phase, a rough patch that we would eventually overcome. But looking back, I see the warning signs clearly now. The late nights Sarah spent at work, the phone calls she took in another room, the way she would often smile at her phone, her expression shifting from joy to guilt whenever I entered the room. I brushed it off as paranoia, convinced that my insecurities were getting the best of me. After all, we had built a life together, surely that meant something. When I think about Professor Hargrove, I can't help but feel a mix of anger and contempt. He was a man who preached ethics, who wrote books on morality and the importance of integrity. He was a figure of respect in the academic community, someone students looked up to. Yet here he was, sleeping with my wife, shattering the very principles he claimed to uphold. I couldn't help but wonder how long this affair had been going on. Had it started as a casual conversation about ethics, evolving into something more? Did he see my wife as just another conquest, or did he genuinely care for her? I felt sick at the thought. The irony of the situation was almost too much to bear. A man who teaches ethics betraying those very ideals while taking advantage of my wife's vulnerabilities. As I replayed the memories of our life together, I felt a mix of nostalgia and bitterness. I remembered our shared laughter, the vacations we took, the dreams we crafted. Yet those memories now felt tainted, overshadowed by this dark revelation. I could almost hear the echoes of our past, mocking me with every joyful moment we had shared. In the days that followed, I found myself in a haze, unable to focus on anything but the betrayal. I tried to reach out to friends for support, but I couldn't bring myself to share the truth. How could I explain that the woman I loved had chosen another man, especially one who preached morality? I began to dig deeper, piecing together the timeline of their affair. I examined the messages, looking for clues, trying to make sense of it all. Each discovery felt like a punch to the gut, a reminder of the trust that had been shattered. It was during this time that I started to formulate a plan, not just to confront Sarah, but to expose Professor Hargrove for the hypocrite he truly was. I wanted to make him a cautionary tale, a living example of how those who preach ethics can easily fall from grace. I knew I would need evidence, something concrete to bring to light. I began to gather information, compiling a dossier that would serve as the foundation for my revenge. I wanted to ensure that he would face the consequences of his actions, that he wouldn't get away with this betrayal unscathed. In my heart, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was my chance to reclaim my narrative, to turn the tables on the man who had disrupted my life. It was a dark path, but I was prepared to walk it if it meant exposing the truth. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself descending deeper into a world of investigation, fueled by anger and betrayal. I became a shadow, lurking in the corners of my own life, observing every interaction, every moment that could provide insight into the affair between Sarah and Professor Hargrove. I needed to know the full extent of their relationship, to understand the depths of her betrayal. My first step was to gather evidence. I started by following Sarah discreetly, trying to piece together her movements. I would sit in my car outside her workplace, watching as she interacted with coworkers, all the while my mind raced with questions. Was he there? Had they met for lunch? Each time she left the office, I felt a surge of adrenaline, a mix of hope and dread. One afternoon, I saw her meet a group of colleagues for drinks after work. My heart pounded as I parked across the street, watching her laugh and chat, oblivious to my presence. I strained to see if Hargrove would be among them, but he never appeared. I felt a pang of relief mixed with frustration. Was she hiding their meetings, or had I been wrong about the extent of their relationship? The breakthrough came a few days later when I received a tip from a friend who worked at the university. I overheard some students talking about Hargrove, he said, leaning in closer as if the walls could hear. They mentioned a new book he's writing on ethics and morality. Apparently, he's been quite personal with some of his students. I felt a jolt of recognition. This man wasn't just an academic, he was a predator disguised as a mentor. The thought made my blood boil. I couldn't let him continue this charade. I needed to gather more information about his interactions, especially with Sarah. I decided to dig into his background, researching his publications and lectures. It was a rabbit hole of ethical theories, philosophical debates, and moral quandaries. The more I learned about his work, the more I felt the weight of irony pressing down on me. This man had built a career on the principles of right and wrong, yet he was living a lie. I began to compile a list of his lectures, public appearances, and any potential connections he had with Sarah. One evening, I stumbled upon a video of one of his lectures. He spoke passionately about the importance of integrity in relationships, the value of trust, and the consequences of betrayal. I felt a mix of rage and disbelief. How could he stand there, preaching to students about moral responsibility while engaging in an affair with a married woman? I knew then that I had to expose him, to make sure his hypocrisy was laid bare for everyone to see. As I gathered more evidence, I found myself piecing together a timeline of their affair. I discovered that their relationship had started months earlier, during a seminar where Sarah had been a guest speaker. They had exchanged numbers under the guise of academic collaboration, but it quickly devolved into something far more intimate. I found snippets of their conversations that made my stomach churn. There were flirtatious messages, inside jokes, and even plans to meet up under the pretense of discussing her career. Each revelation felt like a knife twisting deeper into my heart. I couldn't help but wonder how Sarah could reconcile her actions with the values we had always shared. I remembered our discussions about fidelity, loyalty, and the sanctity of marriage. Did she truly believe she was justified in her betrayal? Did she even think about me when she was with him? At night, I lay awake, replaying those moments in my mind, struggling to understand how I had become the unwitting victim in this twisted narrative. My thoughts were a chaotic jumble of anger, sadness, and a desperate need for resolution. I felt like a character in one of my own novels, caught in a web of deceit, and I was determined to take control of the story. I began to formulate a plan, one that would expose Hargrove not just to Sarah but to the world. I envisioned a public revelation, a way to ensure that his hypocrisy was laid bare for all to see. It would be a cautionary tale, a lesson on the consequences of moral failings. I wanted him to feel the weight of his actions, to understand the pain he had caused, not just to me but to my wife as well. As I continued my investigation, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. I knew I was walking a dangerous path, one that could lead to further heartbreak and chaos. But I was fueled by a sense of justice, a desire to reclaim my narrative and expose the truth. It was time to confront the reality of what had happened, to take the next step in my plan for revenge. I would not be a passive character in this story. I would take action, and soon, everyone would know the truth about Professor Hargrove. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than I had anticipated. The weight of my discovery hung heavily over me, and I knew I could no longer delay the confrontation with Sarah. I had gathered enough evidence to confront her, and the thought of finally facing her brought a mix of anxiety and determination that coursed through my veins. I chose a quiet evening for our confrontation, one where we wouldn't be distracted by the noise of the outside world. I waited until after dinner when the sun had set and the house was cloaked in shadows. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator and the rustle of leaves outside, but the silence inside felt deafening. "Sarah," I called, my voice steady despite the turmoil within. She was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book. She looked up, her expression shifting from casual interest to apprehension. "Yeah," she replied, setting the book aside. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "We need to talk." Her eyes widened and I could see the tension in her shoulders. "About what?" "About Daniel Hargrove," I said, watching her reaction closely. Her face paled, and for a moment I thought she might try to deny it. But then she simply looked away, the guilt radiating from her. I can explain," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Explain? You're sleeping with a man who teaches ethics, Sarah. How do you justify that?" My voice rose, a mix of anger and disbelief spilling over. "I never meant for it to happen," she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. It just happened. We connected on a level I didn't expect. He understood me in ways you don't." Her words were like daggers, each one piercing through the remnants of my trust. "So what, you thought it was okay to betray me, to throw away everything we built together for some fleeting connection?" She opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off. "You think I don't know how relationships can become complicated? I've been there too, Sarah, but I would never cheat on you. I thought we were better than that." I know," she shouted, her voice breaking. "I made a mistake, but it wasn't just about sex, it was about feeling alive again, about being seen." I shook my head, the weight of her words suffocating me. "Being seen or being wanted? You're a married woman, Sarah. You took vows. You promised me fidelity and love. How could you throw that away so easily?" Tears streamed down her cheeks, and I felt a pang of sorrow mixed with my anger. I didn't want to hurt her, but I felt like I was in the middle of a storm, and there was no way to escape the chaos. "Daniel is a man who preaches about ethics and responsibility," I continued, my voice low and steady. "How ironic is it that he's sleeping with you, a married woman, while writing a book on morality? It's disgusting. Please don't bring him into this," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "This is about us, not him. I love you, but I got lost. I didn't know how to talk to you anymore." "Love?" I scoffed, the bitterness in my voice palpable. "You don't love someone when you betray them like this. You might think you love me, but love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice. You chose to betray that love." The room fell silent, and for a moment we were both lost in our thoughts. I could see the conflict in her eyes, regret, guilt, and a hint of defiance. She was trying to justify her actions, but I refused to let her off the hook. "I have evidence of your affair," I said coldly, pulling out my phone. "Messages, dates, everything. I've been watching you, Sarah. I know what you've done." Her face turned white and she looked as if she had been struck. You've been spying on me." I was trying to understand how someone I loved could betray me. "You made me feel like I was living in a nightmare." "I never wanted to hurt you," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought I could handle it, that it was just a phase. I never meant for it to go this far." I took a step back, my heart racing. "You think this is just a phase? This isn't just a mistake, Sarah. It's a betrayal of everything we are. You need to understand that." "I know," she cried, desperation lacing her voice. "I'm sorry, please, let's work through this. I'll do anything." "Anything?" I echoed, incredulous. "What does that even mean? How can I trust you again? You've shattered my faith in you and in our marriage." As I stared into her tear-filled eyes, I felt a mixture of anger and sorrow. I wanted to believe her, to think that we could somehow repair the damage, but deep down I knew that the trust was gone. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I won't be a fool standing by while you make excuses for your actions. I'm done." Her face crumpled, and I could see the weight of my words hit her like a tidal wave. She reached out, but I stepped back, unwilling to let her touch me. "I'll expose him, Sarah," I said, the resolve hardening in my chest. "I'll make sure everyone knows what he really is, a hypocrite who preaches ethics while living a lie." "Don't do that," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Please don't ruin his career over this." "Why not? He ruined our lives," I shot back. "You think he deserves to keep his reputation intact after what he's done? No, he needs to face the consequences of his actions." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving behind the shattered remnants of our relationship. I felt like a ghost in my own home, haunted by memories of what once was. The confrontation had been painful, but it was only the beginning. As I stepped into the night, I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. I would take control of my narrative. I would expose the truth, and in doing so, I would reclaim my life. The days that followed my confrontation with Sarah were a blur of emotions: anger, betrayal, and a sense of purpose that I had never felt before. I had made the decision to expose Professor Hargrove, and with each passing hour, my resolve only strengthened. I was determined to turn this betrayal into a cautionary tale, not just for Sarah, but for everyone who might fall prey to the allure of hypocrisy masked as morality. I began to strategize, meticulously planning how to reveal the truth. I gathered all the evidence I had collected, screenshots of Sarah's conversations with Hargrove, timestamps of their meetings, and any public information about his lectures and writings. It was time to show the world who he really was, a man who preached ethics while living a life steeped in deceit. I decided to start with a letter, an open letter that would be sent to the university where Hargrove taught. It would outline not only the affair but also the hypocrisy of his teachings. I wanted the faculty, students, and the community to know that the man they revered was a fraud. My goal was to ensure that his reputation would be tarnished, that he would face the consequences of his actions. As I drafted the letter, I felt a mix of satisfaction and dread. I was playing a dangerous game, one that could have repercussions not just for Hargrove but for Sarah as well. She had already expressed her fear of ruining his career, but I couldn't let that stop me. This was about justice, about holding someone accountable for their choices. I spent hours crafting the letter, pouring my heart into each word. I detailed the nature of their relationship, referencing his own writings on ethics and morality. I highlighted the discrepancies between his teachings and his actions, illustrating the profound irony of his situation. I wanted to make it clear that this was not just a personal vendetta. It was about exposing the hypocrisy that had infiltrated the very fabric of his professional life. Once I was satisfied with the letter, I printed multiple copies, preparing to send them to various departments within the university. I wanted to cast a wide net, ensuring that the truth couldn't be ignored. Before I hit send, I paused, a moment of doubt creeping in. Was I really ready to unleash this storm? I thought about Sarah, about the pain this would cause her. But then I remembered the betrayal, the anguish I felt when I discovered her infidelity. I couldn't let that go unpunished. With a deep breath, I sealed the envelopes and prepared to send them out. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I dropped them into the mailbox, a sense of finality washing over me. There was no turning back now. The following weeks were a whirlwind of reactions. Hargrove's name began to circulate in the media, his reputation unraveling as the story broke. News outlets picked up the tale, and I watched with a mix of satisfaction and horror as his world crumbled. Students began to question his teachings, faculty members expressed their outrage, and the university launched an investigation into his conduct. I felt a strange sense of power, knowing that I had played a part in this exposure, but with that power came an unexpected weight. As the fallout unfolded, I found myself grappling with guilt. Was this truly justice, or was I simply perpetuating a cycle of pain? Sarah reached out to me, her voice trembling as she begged me to reconsider my actions. "You're ruining him," she pleaded. "He's a good man who made a mistake. Please don't do this." I could hear the desperation in her voice, the fear of losing everything, but I stood firm. "He's not a good man, Sarah. He's a hypocrite and he deserves to face the consequences. You can't expect me to sit back and allow him to continue preaching ethics while he betrays his own values." The conversation spiraled into arguments, with Sarah trying to defend Hargrove, claiming that he had shown her kindness and understanding when I hadn't. Each word felt like a stab to my heart, but I couldn't let her manipulation sway me. As the investigation progressed, I watched as Hargrove's life began to unravel. He was placed on administrative leave, his lectures canceled, and his reputation shattered. I felt a sense of vindication, but it was quickly overshadowed by the emotional turmoil that followed. I began to see the repercussions of my actions. Students who had once idolized Hargrove now spoke of betrayal and disappointment. Colleagues who had respected him turned their backs, and I could feel the weight of my revenge settling heavily on my shoulders. In the midst of it all, I began to question my own morality. I had sought to expose Hargrove for his hypocrisy, but in doing so, I had become entangled in a web of my own making. I had turned a personal betrayal into a public spectacle, and the lines between right and wrong had blurred. As the dust settled, I found myself standing at a crossroads. I had achieved what I set out to do, but at what cost? I had lost a part of myself in the process, and I didn't know how to reconcile the man I had become with the values I once held dear. With each news story that emerged, I felt the weight of my actions pressing down on me. I had sought revenge, but in the end, I was left with a hollow victory. The aftermath of my actions was a cacophony of emotions: satisfaction, guilt, and an unsettling sense of emptiness. I had set out to expose Professor Hargrove, to make him a cautionary tale for all who would listen, yet I found myself grappling with the consequences of my revenge. As his reputation crumbled, I was left with the shards of my own life, wondering if the price of justice was worth the cost of my soul. Days turned into weeks, and the media frenzy surrounding Hargrove began to fade. He had become a ghost, a shadow of his former self, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had played a significant role in his downfall. The university's investigation concluded with his resignation, and while I felt a flicker of triumph, it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of loss. I had wanted to reclaim my narrative, to take control of the story that had spiraled out of my hands, but in doing so, I had lost something essential: my sense of morality, my ability to trust, and perhaps even a part of my humanity. The thrill of revenge had morphed into a haunting realization. I had become the very thing I despised. Sarah and I had tried to navigate the wreckage of our relationship, but it was clear that the trust we once shared was irreparably broken. Our conversations became strained, filled with awkward silences and unspoken words. She was angry with me for exposing Hargrove, but she was also ashamed of her actions. The love we had shared was now a fragile facade, and I could feel it slipping away with each passing day. One evening, as we sat across from each other at the dining table, I finally spoke the words that had been weighing on my heart. "We can't keep doing this, Sarah. We're not the same people we were before." Tears filled her eyes, and she nodded, her expression a mixture of sadness and regret. "I know. I don't want to lose you, but I don't know how to fix this." "Maybe we can't fix it," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe it's time to let go." With those words, I felt a profound sense of liberation wash over me. I had fought so hard to reclaim my narrative, to expose the hypocrisy that had invaded my life, yet I realized that holding onto the past was only dragging me further into despair. As difficult as it was, I knew I had to let Sarah go. We had shared beautiful moments, but those memories were now tainted by betrayal. It was time to break free from the chains of our shared pain and forge a new path forward, one that would allow me to heal and rediscover who I was outside of our shattered relationship. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I threw myself into my writing, channeling my emotions into my stories. I found solace in the characters I created, exploring themes of betrayal, morality, and the complex nature of human relationships. Writing became my therapy, my way of processing the chaos that had unfolded. I also sought therapy, trying to untangle the web of emotions that had ensnared me. In those sessions, I learned to confront my own demons, to acknowledge the anger and pain that had driven my quest for revenge. I realized that while Hargrove had betrayed me, I too had betrayed my own values in my pursuit of justice. Through this journey of self-discovery, I began to understand the intricacies of morality and ethics. I pondered the very questions Hargrove had posed in his lectures. What does it mean to be ethical? Can we reconcile our actions with our beliefs? I came to appreciate the complexity of human nature, the shades of gray that exist between right and wrong. As the months passed, I found a sense of peace slowly returning to my life. I learned to forgive, not just Sarah, but also myself. I had been hurt, but I refused to let that pain define me. I wanted to emerge from this experience stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Eventually, I decided to reach out to Sarah one last time. We met at a cafe, a neutral ground where we could talk without the weight of our past looming over us. As we sat across from each other, I saw the familiar spark in her eyes, but this time it was tinged with understanding. "I've missed you," she said softly. "I've missed you too," I admitted, feeling a bittersweet ache in my chest, "but I think we both need to move on." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I can't change what happened, but I want you to know how truly sorry I am." "I know," I replied, "and I think it's time we both forgive ourselves and each other." With that, we shared a moment of quiet understanding, acknowledging the pain and the love that had once defined our relationship. It was a bittersweet farewell, but it felt right. As I walked away from that cafe, I felt a renewed sense of hope. I had faced the darkness of betrayal and emerged with a deeper understanding of love, trust, and the complexities of human relationships. My journey had been fraught with pain, but it had also taught me invaluable lessons about resilience and the power of forgiveness. In the end, I realized that while I had sought revenge, what I truly craved was healing. I had turned a tragic story into a new beginning, one where I could reclaim my life and my narrative, no longer defined by betrayal but empowered by the lessons learned along the way. And with that, I closed the chapter on that part of my life, ready to embrace whatever came next.